I have been considered a serious risk to the public health. It's a political fudge.
Somebody from the top is saying it's a mental health disorder, really.
Oh yes, that disease that people think that they're sick.
Oh, we don't know what to do with those people. They're too time-consuming.
Then everybody else is going to go off, Elder. You're easy game, aren't you?
They don't acknowledge MA. It doesn't exist. And medical science is just incredibly dismissive as a generalization.
Let me ask you this. Have you heard of an illness that was affecting the planet and you knew nothing about it? Would you be curious to find out more? Well, this was the case with me. I was intrigued to find some more information. This took me on a journey of 6 years, never anticipating what was coming towards me. This is the story. Florence Nightingale, the founder of modern nursing, came to prominence while serving as a nurse in 1856 during the Crimean War. Tending to soldiers, she and her nurses saved many lives. On returning to England, she became disabled by a mystery illness and confined to her bedroom for the rest of her life. Incredibly, 100 years later, it was reported by the British Medical Journal that she was history's most famous invalid and possibly the most successful malingerer. Why? Was this ME? And what is ME? For the purpose of this film, we will investigate in the UK and the USA primarily.
I don't think there's any other illness which has so much politics and fighting and controversy around it, which doesn't really help the people who are ill. At the end of the day, we're all still ill. You know, the rest of them are all fighting and screaming and yelling, and we're all still ill at the end of the day.
Oh, God.
What is known is complicated because ME is also known as chronic fatigue syndrome, or the media-generated name of yuppie flu. The first cases of this mystery illness were reported over 100 years ago, when cluster outbreaks would occur in different countries around the world. Communities were struck down. There were no answers. It was described as atypical polio. Atypical polio because, although similar in symptoms to polio, the symptoms seemed to come and go, and no poliovirus was detected. So the mystery continued. Then, in 1955, another outbreak strikes the Royal Free Hospital in London. Scores of doctors and nurses come down with a similar mystery illness. It started with a fever in 292 patients, but they struggled to recover. Again, similar to polio, but test results were inconclusive. So it was described by the media as mass hysteria. Some of the patients spent the rest of their lives confined to their beds. With mass hysteria?
Hysteria. That's the explanation. It's hysteria. These unexplained illnesses have cropped up all through the history of medicine. Diabetes was hysteria. MS was hysteria. All wrong, all insulting, all accepted. And that's the way it's done. And now we've got it here with the ME.
Although labelled hysteria, some doctors did establish a biomedical explanation as to what happened at the Royal Free. And in 1956, Dr. Melvin Ramsey declared the mystery illness as myalgic encephalomyelitis. So, what's in a name? In the case of ME, an awful lot.
Myalgic encephalomyelitis is a name that indicates there is an inflammatory condition of the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord associated with muscle pain. That's what the words mean. And they're all in Greek, so we can't understand them very easily.
Myalgic encephalomyelitis.
Myalgic encephalomyelitis.
What is that called? And these people are all bedbound. Myalgic, what? Well, I don't know what I mean.
The definition, let alone the pronunciation, has proven problematic for the last 60 years, which is odd because in 1969, the World Health Organization defined ME as a neurological disorder, firmly placing it into the category of a biomedical disease. Despite this fact, the battle worldwide to determine whether ME or chronic fatigue syndrome is biomedical or the product of a mental disorder continues to this day. In other words, are you really sick, or is it all in your mind?
People have tried to tell us that, well, we just need to think more positive and we need to exercise, and that it's psychological and that it'll go away. I've had this for 21 years, and I know that's not true. I've lost 4 friends to this disease.
The answer is not simple, it's not easy, but to say it's a psychiatric problem is easy, and it also puts the responsibility on the patient. It's your fault, it's your brain, you're the case.
The implications of this battle affect the lives of 20 million sufferers worldwide. That's a lot of people. And don't forget, for every patient, there is a family around them also affected.
I left med school in London, where I'd been told during my psychiatry training that this was a non-disease. It was, if anything, it was mass hysteria. So go away, forget about it, it didn't exist. 5, 6, 7 years later, I was working as a junior doctor in hospital, and I picked up a dose of chickenpox from one of my patients. And I can still predate the onset of my illness. I just did not feel well, and that is how my illness went on for years and years and years. The chickenpox came, the chickenpox itself went, but the ME-type symptoms didn't go away at all.
I got ill after the Coxsackie virus. I was living in the west of Scotland at the time, and there was an outbreak of this particular virus.
You think, well, it was like a flu that I had, so it must be airborne. It's got to be something, you know, that I caught it.
So, how do you describe the symptoms?
When they hear that I have chronic fatigue syndrome, their first response is, well, you don't look sick. And of course, to people who don't know me, I don't. If you saw somebody with cancer, potentially you wouldn't know that they had cancer.
The thing about this illness I think that's very deceptive to people is when you see an ME patient in public, they were well enough that day to get up and get out and do something. What the public never sees is the person who's in bed, who's stuck in bed, who can't take care of themselves, who can't take care of their own basic needs.
I realized that I was trying to describe something that the words don't really exist for.
The first thing to remember is the severity of symptoms varies greatly from patient to patient.
I suppose the best way to describe it is that you were wearing a pair of fisherman's wellies filled up with water, you know, those big long wellies, right? And that, you know, some idiot was blowing your brain up with a pump.
In fact, the defining characteristic is that the intensity of symptoms come and go.
Part of the problem with the disease is that no one can kind of go, this is what's going to happen.
I'm up and down all over the place. This when it gets bad. My voice goes, and my muscles and my legs go up properly. Don't really go out. Find it very, very difficult to go downstairs and so on. But it's part of it. Get on with it now, I suppose.
My head feels like it's going to explode. I don't know how else to explain it than that.
Some sufferers are able to work and study, but their lives are severely compromised. But 25% of patients are confined at home and often alone in a room for the remainder of their lives.
I've had it for nearly 12 years and I've been bedridden for nearly 3. In the last 2 years I haven't left my room. I can have the curtains open at the moment. I haven't always been able to do that because of the light sensitivities. But it's a nice room. But I would like to get out of it. So that's what I see. There is my bathroom. There's my delightful commode. Bowl of soapy water underneath which the carers change every day. And that's it, that's my view. This is my world that I live in. I live in a space of 6 foot by 3, which is about the size of a coffin, which is the world of ME, CFS.
When you get to know these sick people, you realise the quality of their personalities, that they are people who often have led very active lives beforehand. They've often been either sportsmen, they've often run companies, and they've suddenly been struck down by this illness, and they've just been disabled, really, profoundly disabled.
I didn't know anything about ME 2 years ago. I didn't really know a lot about it this time last year. I take 30 tablets a day. And that's the least I take. If I followed the box to the letter, I'd take, probably going over 40. I think if I didn't take them, I'd certainly be housebound at least, if not bedridden. And with 2 kids and a wife who works full time, I've got to have some kind of mobility. It just seems to be a huge secret that millions of sufferers know. And no one will listen to us. It's really bizarre.
Millions have it. More are getting it. So, treated by this sufferer's recommended dose, 20 million patients on 40 pills each day is 800 million pills a day. At this point in a documentary, you would start to hear opinions from the other side of the argument. But here is the problem. When we contacted the leading authority from the psychological camp in the UK to ask for an interview, we were declined. One of the reasons it is so hard for the psychological camp to come forward is that when they do, they are issued with death threats.
Dear Doctor, your comments are doing nothing but destroying any hope of finding a cure for this illness. It is a living nightmare, and your lack of basic human compassion is a sign of your contempt for comfort of others.
Why would perfectly functioning individuals with good jobs, whose lives are reduced to staying in bed, start issuing death threats? Why? Well, perhaps it is down to comments by leading members of the psychological establishment. For example, ME/CFS sufferers are the undeserving sick of our society and our health services. Michael Sharp. ME is simply a belief that one has an illness called ME. Simon Wesley.
So, I think what really needs to happen is that, people like Simon Wesley, Michael Sharp, is for them to go in front of, if there's a court of human rights in The Hague, and actually go on trial for crimes against humanity.
I have seen individuals really be destroyed sometimes in their therapy by a very critical therapist who has said, "What's wrong with you? Why aren't you getting better? You must not be trying hard enough." And they are doing everything that they can, and of course they're not getting better.
A moment's pause here. We have very ill people not being heard. In this endless torment, would this not be a case against human rights? Back in 1984, a cluster outbreak of the illness occurred in the area around Incline Village, Lake Tahoe.
Since the fall of 1984, doctors have diagnosed more than 200 cases of the same illness in this area.
A mystery disease has struck the town of Incline Village, Nevada, a disease for which doctors have no cure. Researchers suspect that it may be caused by a newly discovered virus.
The first thing I heard were people were catching the strange flu, and they just weren't recovering. If somebody caught this flu and got over it within about 3 weeks or so, it seemed like they were pretty much out of the woods. But if it went on any longer than that, 4 weeks or longer, the rumors said that people just weren't getting better. In fact, in some cases, they were getting worse.
It's like all the energy is just taken out of your body, and sometimes I would have to even hold on to furniture to move around.
As more stories came out, we started avoiding people, retreating to our houses, just trying to stay away from this thing and find out what it was.
Brain scans often show abnormal spots, these white areas, and often the patients have symptoms which include forgetfulness and fluctuating emotions.
I had no reason to think that I was going to catch it and not recover. I was in excellent physical condition. I was in my late 20s. It was like nothing I'd ever felt in my life. It was not like any kind of fatigue. It's not on any scale of fatigue. Fatigue is the most inapplicable term that one could possibly apply to this phenomenon. It was paralysis. My limbs were not responding to my mental commands. You would try to place your foot precisely, but instead of having your foot go where you wanted to, it would wind up about 2 or 3 inches below that. So everybody was tripping over a crack in the sidewalk 1/4 inch high. We all had the same concurrency of complaints. People had gait problems that were beyond that of a drunken person. They were easily identifiable from across the street. Most people had photophobia so badly that going out in the middle of the day was intolerable, even with dark glasses. Normal people couldn't comprehend what we were describing to them. We have to do something, and call the CDC for help.
The CDC, the United States Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. Its main goal is to protect public health and safety.
Investigative powers of the CDC brought to bear on this problem, treatment would be weeks away. We thought that just a quick look at a couple people, no more than half a dozen, would convince them of the severity of our problems, and a full-scale investigation would be launched.
There was a sameness to it. So I realized that there was a sort of epidemic form of illness where with clusters, and there were a number in this area, Placerville and Yerington and Truckee. And so at that point in time was about when we solicited the help of the CDC and asked them to investigate. They came out and they said, well, something is certainly going on, but we can't identify what it is, and that was it.
So when they packed up and left, we were devastated.
One of the investigators from the CDC announced that the outbreak was collusion between patients and doctors, and therefore unworthy of further pursuit. So after this, it was generally reported that it was a case of mass hysteria, and named yuppie flu by the media. Hysteria once again. So why didn't they find an illness? Well, this is the crux of the matter. Without clinical medical signs, a doctor cannot diagnose an illness, and all their medical tests at the time came back negative.
Patients come in and they're examined for all sorts of things and nothing is found. So, this is why it was given the term yuppie flu or people just malingering. It really requires a diagnostic test before the majority of the clinical world will believe in it.
It's very easy to budget for a broken leg. It costs X thousands of dollars, the person's well. We recruit that in their insurance premiums over 3 years and we're back where we started. Somebody who's chronically ill and is consuming services and diagnostics and getting drugs that don't work become very costly to the system.
The cost of dealing with an undefined medical condition could be huge, and so this mystery illness needed to be handled carefully. The creation of a new syndrome would effectively begin to dilute the condition from the World Health Organization's biomedical listing for ME and turn the illness into a new psychological disorder, chronic fatigue syndrome.
A lot of doctors will say, oh, you're suffering with depression. Your normal reaction to that is, I can't do anything. I'm usually a very active, conscious, articulate, intelligent human being, and my life has been stopped. Would there have been any other progression than depression in those circumstances?
Maybe there is a condition like that. It's not this.
If there's not a laboratory test in question, then they're always subject to psychological interference. Don't forget that psychiatry is the one branch of medicine that can never prove its case.
So the notion for them was, well, if it's psychological, you either just pull yourself together or you take drugs. After a while, when you hear things repeated over and over and over again, by people who genuinely care as well, these aren't people that are saying these things in any malicious way. Why don't you walk around? And you kind of go, my legs don't work. And I said, why don't your legs work? And you can't. If I kind of knew that, I'd probably be able to deal with this far better. But as far as I know, I'm thinking I want my legs to move, my legs aren't moving.
That thought that I would rather be sitting at home, immobile, basically in solitude, is just ludicrous. I mean, it's just, and to me, it's just, that's insane.
It is my experience that the vast majority of chronic fatigue ME patients have been left to rot on the medical vine. There is now overwhelming evidence that CFS ME is a physical condition with physical causes, and to ignore that evidence is a travesty of good science and justice.
The evidence, if it's looked at dispassionately, is overwhelming that this is a biomedical problem. There are 4,000 papers which have not even been looked at by NICE, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, which is issuing guidelines. And the guideline is to follow the diagnosis up with psychological techniques, management techniques. They're not curative, they're not attempting to be curative, they are attempts to manage the illness.
There's been several papers to suggest that CBT is not the way to treat these patients, and there's been several papers to say, yes, this is the way to treat these patients. I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, so I can't really comment, but I understand that the psychiatrists presented with a psychiatric type patient treat them as a psychiatric patient.
Here's what's intriguing. The World Health Organization classifies ME/CFS as a neurological disorder, whilst in the UK, the National Health Service claims you can manage CFS by changing the way you think and behave.
I probably followed a fairly typical course with this thing whereby you get offered certain helping therapies. I've been to one of the 11 centres around the country which were set up a few years ago. It was a cost of about £11 million, where they do a lot of talking but not a lot of doing. I was also offered some cognitive behavioural therapy, which was great. I mean, I went and talked to a very nice psychologist and we had some very pleasant chats, but it didn't do me any good.
The idea that all CFS symptoms come from deconditioning that could simply be avoided by overcoming negative thought patterns is ridiculous and offensive.
Just not being able to walk properly, not being able to function correctly. How is it? One day I said I could maybe hang the washing out, and another day I couldn't even do that. You know, I couldn't even get my head off the pillow.
If you tell someone their illness is imaginary and they need to change their mind because they've got maladaptive beliefs, they could be ignoring a major symptom, which is saying there's something seriously wrong with this patient. And there's a very famous case of an MP, Brimore John, who was advised because he had ME to exercise. And he went in the gym at the House of Commons and collapsed and died on Westminster Bridge. I mean, these are the sort of things that are happening. They're not well known, but they ought to be known.
The Medical Research Council has a file on ME/CFS that is closed to the public under the Official Secrets Act. Normally, files of this nature are kept from the public for 30 years. For example, documents concerning informing government policy, documents on defence to national security, to the economy are held for 30 years. The file on ME/CFS, an apparent psychological illness, is to be held for over 79 years. Why? One of these documents was obtained by legal means. Notes from a symposium on CFS that was held on the 12th to the 14th of May 1992. The section titled "The Treatment Process" is particularly notable. The first duty of the doctor is to support as much useful function as possible and avoid the legitimization of symptoms and reinforcement of disability. In other words, try and help, but stop them believing their symptoms are real. Why? There are simply too many people describing the same symptoms for this condition to be considered all in the mind.
This is where I think there's a real abuse of children who've been falsely diagnosed as psychiatric cases and abused as psychiatric cases because they've got ME.
Why should children go down with this illness? Why should their lives be ruined?
Yeah, well, it was just an ordinary Friday and she'd come home from school and she said, "Oh, I don't feel well, I've got a sore throat." And it went on like that and just more and more symptoms kept coming up. I just cried because I read the description of somebody else's 8-year-old daughter and what they'd been through. I thought, my daughter's only 5 and this sounds like her.
Pat Farrow's ME dates back to 1982. Sadly, her son Casey was also diagnosed by the age of 9. After many years fighting the illness while working and studying, he died in his sleep at the age of 23.
I had 75 kids who were sick, multiples in families. One, a mom who was sick, and 3 siblings. So it was a big mess.
And not being listened to by any medical authority?
No.
Cassie and both her children are sufferers. 8 years ago, they all came down with the flu, which left them all with ME.
My daughter is 14 years old now, and she's been sort of well, but she puts in a day at school and she comes home and is just exhausted and can't do anything else. She spends her weekends sleeping. She has constant migraines. She's not quite as sick as I am, or certainly not as sick as her brother. He got sick when he was 13, so his 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th birthdays. And all the time in between. Have been sick, mostly in bed, mostly in a lot of pain.
I've been fighting this sickness since I was 12 years old. And it's finally sinking in to a level of reality that I can't deny.
Watching a child suffer every day at the hands of a chronic, disabling illness is heartbreaking for any parent. Imagine a healthy child coming down with this illness and then the child being forcibly removed from the family. By 2004 in the UK, 7 out of every 100 families whose children have ME had been subject to child protection proceedings, children being removed from their parents and their homes, often because they are accused of Munchausen by proxy, which means that parents are making up a complaint about a child to gain sympathy for themselves. The Danish Board of Health, on February the 12th, 2013, instructed 5 policemen, 2 social workers, 2 doctors, and a locksmith to remove Karina Hansen from a home on the grounds that she was mentally ill and needed to be confined to a psychiatric hospital. She is suffering with severe ME, and her parents requested an IV at home to help keep her alive. However, the Danish doctors had told the family that the diagnosis of ME was not recognised in their country. Karina remains in Hammel Neuro Center, Denmark. In the absence of a diagnostic test, it is left to the medical establishment to write a definition of what they believe the illness is. And those who author the definition control how governments and insurance companies arrive at disability payments.
People who are giving advice, we should know where they're coming from, and we don't always know. We see their names in conferences organised by insurance companies, advising them on how to proceed with these illnesses.
Unum Provident, the largest disability insurer in the US and the UK, held a symposium on occupational health issues, where ME was described as the malingerer's charter. An extract from a Unum document, Chronic Fatigue Management Plan. We stand to lose millions if we do not move quickly to address this increasing problem. The main speakers of the Unum conference were 2 of the leading UK psychiatrists, who first introduced psychological symptoms into a definition of the illness with the Oxford criteria. It is interesting to note that the writing of the Oxford criteria was funded by an antidepressant manufacturer and 2 senior UK psychiatrists. None of the leading experts on the physical cause were involved.
So government, to its shame, says we fund to support policy. Well, if the policy is wrong, they're funding a wrong policy. But it saves money.
Somebody had hit a panic button and they didn't know what to do, because they knew that there was thousands of people all over the country coming down with this strange so-called illness. And they realised that if it was going to be classified as a definite physical disease rather than a psychosocial disease, there were going to be implications for the Department of Work and Pensions or the insurance industry. So it began to be very much a political problem as well as a medical problem.
Perhaps that is why funding for biomedical research into a physical cause for this illness is denied year after year in the UK and the US. So the story remained the same, But then an announcement was made in Science magazine that will turn the ME CFS world upside down.
And now, back to Nevada Newsmakers with Sam Shad.
I'm back on Nevada Newsmakers on a great day here with Annette Whittemore, president and founder of the Whittemore-Peterson Institute, and Judy Mikovits. I can't think of a more exciting program I've done because what we're about to talk about is world-shattering news.
It's just amazement. It's an entire new field of medicine, and everyone who's ever worked in this family of viruses, now that we've shown it's a human and pathogen, is extremely excited.
In association with the National Cancer Institute and the Cleveland Clinic, the Whittemore-Peterson Institute announces the discovery of a retrovirus in chronic fatigue syndrome patients. I never saw this one coming, an unanticipated breakthrough. I flew to Nevada to follow the story.
Little did we know at that time that her extraordinary experience and extraordinary understanding came from work in a laboratory that was working on HIV and cancer. And because of all of those experiences, she began to develop a very comprehensive research program looking at all different aspects of an individual's immune system, and we also began to look for a virus in this disease.
We're on the edge of effective treatments for what has been considered a psychological disease. I'm also sobered by the fact that retroviral diseases aren't necessarily cured. More than 10 million Americans could be infected with this virus, and that's more than 10 times the infection of HIV.
At the moment, there's a great scientific race to see who can replicate these findings first.
You could see lights on late at night. The scientists were extremely excited to have this new virus to study in the human population and figure out what it did.
Well, this will be the first time that I've said it publicly, really. Yes, I am XMRV positive. It's been really scary to find out that you have a retrovirus that no one knows much about. But we knew it was going to be something serious always. You know, I've been sick since the age of 11, and I've seen my friends pass away. So I know this is serious.
It's very exciting, and it was all over the press, and that was great. And it's brilliant that this kind of intelligent biomedical research is going on.
I was like, yay! So they've discovered it's a virus after all.
The one said today, I don't know whether to jump for joy or jump out the window. And I said, well, given your case, don't jump anywhere. But they're happy because they know what it is.
Step one is to demonstrate that it's present in people with ME, but then we've got to decide, is it actually doing anything harmful if people have got it? It may be a harmless passenger virus.
It's difficult for me because for me it's clear as day. Go look at those people, take the blood and figure out what's going on. Because it's clearly not about fatigue, and so that's been a real problem. And so that perception has to go away because the people are sick, they're not tired.
This is in my own personal opinion. I think the patients really kind of drop faster here just because they feel that there's no hope.
What does it mean to you? It means everything. It means getting my life back, hopefully. An answer to 6 years of searching for an answer to why I've been so exhausted, why I've been in pain, why I've lost so much in my life.
Well, it would explain why my life has been totally devastated for the last 30 years, and it would be vindication that I had every right to be feeling ill, and that it's not psychological illness. And it would give me hope that there will be treatments to return to normal life, which would just be amazing.
I don't want to go another 12 years like this. I want the chance to, be able to enjoy the rest of my youth. I'd like to have a career. I'd like the chance to have a family, and I'm hoping if I'm found XMRV positive, that will kind of allow me to get treatment.
Well, first of all, I hope that the results of the study will confirm what Judy Mikovits wants it to confirm, and I hope that it'll put pressure on the governments around the world to actually do something on the biomedical front, because so far this whole disease has been written off as being psychosomatic, and that's just not right.
Mama?
I can't even imagine how a human retrovirus could cause the sensitivities to be in a dark room, to not be able to be touched for 4 years and lay there completely still. There's something wrong with that. They're not psychotic, they're sick.
This is not an airborne disease, which is something that people had potentially thought about. I mean, this is something that's all over the world. Yeah, I mean, and it's just stunning. But it's actually fluids and blood.
Patients with ME will no longer be able to donate blood in the UK under new safety guidelines. The move is motivated by concerns that the illness may be caused by a virus which can be transmitted in blood.
A private company, VIPDX, starts selling XMRV blood test kits to US patients.
It's so exciting. Biohazard box. Isn't that just the coolest thing ever? It's a biohazard FedEx package.
Is probably the most significant finding in chronic fatigue syndrome research in its history. And of course, it's also controversial. And within months, within the last few months, 2 studies from Great Britain failed to reproduce those results.
If it were easy to find, somebody would have found it a long time ago.
But then, in conjunction with the US Food and Drug Administration and the National Institute of Health, Dr. Harvey Alter, the scientist highly regarded for his groundbreaking work in identifying hepatitis C, confirms the XMRV findings, but hold back their publication. Why? Well, it turns out the Centre for Disease Control did their own research, which came up negative. Suddenly, you've got 2 US government agencies offering opposing scientific results. Despite this, the NIH were confident and went ahead and published their findings. They found one of 4 different MLV-like viruses in 86.5% of patients, compared with just 6.8% of healthy blood donors. 6.8% of healthy controls would mean 21 million Americans are walking around infected with MLVs, a virus family that XMRV belongs to. In its negative report, the CDC did say more studies, however, are needed to determine the prevalence of XMRV in healthy populations. Why say more studies are needed if you claim not to have found it? Either way, with confirmation by the National Institute of Health, XMRV was back on track, and Judy set off to help scientists around the world with the difficult techniques involved in detecting the retrovirus.
That's why you give seminars like this, because somebody might see something in the data that I present that leads to an idea that helps us understand some of the controversial areas in how to detect XMRV better. So that's why I come. It's great.
How it got into humans is unclear. When I see a disease that may be caused by virus, I saw evidence that some individuals develop these symptoms after a prolonged flu-like illness. Flu-like illness is the acute stage of HIV infection and HTLV1 infection.
Although the NIH initially confirmed the XMRV findings, they suddenly withdrew their support. The negative CDC results seem to have overruled the NIH findings. Dr. Harvey Alter was perplexed, as his own studies had no evidence of any kind of contamination. And when Dr. John Coffin of Tufts University came forward with diametrically opposed results, he went on to comment.
When 2 women claimed to be the mother of the same child, King Solomon made a judgment to cut the baby in half and resolve the dilemma. And it was resolved when the real mother chose to give up her share to save the baby's life. Well, I'm no Solomon, but I am stuck here between the diametrically opposed viewpoints of Judy Mikovits and John Coffin, both of whose science I greatly respect. And I don't truthfully know who to cut or what to cut, except that I'd like to cut out of here.
The controversy over XMRV was splitting the scientific community. A study in Germany confirmed the positive findings, but the negative reports were gaining ground, and the funding for new studies were drying up.
We said retrovirus in grant number 1, and we got back from the reviewers, retroviruses have nothing to do with CFS. So establishing a dogma is some of the problem, because then you can't get funding, and if you can't get funding, you can't do research. Pretty easy to see how you could stamp out an area of research as if it's never existed.
It has been proven that 30% of Gulf War veterans came back from Iraq poisoned from exposure to drugs to help fight nerve gas attacks. For their effort, risking their lives for us, they have been diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, a psychiatric illness. Why? The desire to keep this mystery disease in the psychological arena has led to a stubborn determination to not fully investigate a physical cause.
You know, one of the issues that was very surprising to me when this family member got ill is the high degree of people who are turned down for disability. I didn't know that the disability claims were denied at an 80% rate. Now, I'm sure there's some people who are making claims for disability that don't deserve it, but it's probably not 80%. It's pretty difficult to go through that process. When I realized that, I saw that the systems are set up to deny claims and deny benefits, which doesn't make any sense to me, because when somebody is sick, they're not taxpayers, they're not contributing, you know, they're using resources. It would be better for people to be well and healthy than to, you know, try to suppress everything. So you do definitely have to wonder what the heck is going on here.
I saw a very disabled physician this week, for example, as a new patient, and he came here from the Midwest, and you know, he said, I carry the diagnosis and I think it's right, and my doctor would do absolutely nothing. He wouldn't try anything. He just, you know, said, see you when I see you. Call me if something changes. So, you know, that's kind of discouraged for American medicine, because that usually isn't the way. You know, usually you say, oh, well, you could try this, and we have this protocol, and we have this new surgery, or I know a doctor somewhere else that will be aggressive with this. I don't do it myself, but I'll refer you. You know, that's kind of the American way.
Many clinicians do not believe in the condition, and therefore other clinicians do not want to become involved in chronic fatigue research, because career-wise it's a dead end.
It's more important to me to treat patients. I've always loved the translational setting and never want to just work in a lab. It has to relate back to patients. So yes, I guess I actually like the fight.
Little did Judy know what was coming.
Judy Mikovits was the lead researcher at the Whittemore-Peterson Institute before she was fired in August.
Without notice, Dr. Judy Mikovits was fired on the street by Annette Whittemore. Within weeks, she will be in prison, charged with stealing her own research data.
When you know you're innocent, you think it's crazy. You think it's insane. Nobody will ever believe that, because of course it can't happen.
The plot thickens so heavily here, it began to beg a belief. Lawyer and businessman Harvey Whittemore took over the role of being Judy Mikovits' boss from his wife Annette in the summer of 2011, when he was experiencing financial problems. He had opened a company named Red Labs USA, under which he was doing business as VIPDX. There were 2 Red Labs. Then he started selling patients XMRV blood test kits through the one managed by UNR Reno Foundation, which in 2007 Whittemore was the chair of. The business venture was in partnership with the WPI's Dr. Vince Lombardi, a named author of the science paper on the XMRV discovery. This meant Lombardi, who was first author on the discovery of XMRV, was now selling test kits for profit.
They wanted to make a kit to sell to people, essentially to make money on it, and they put Lombardi in charge of making the kit. I told Harvey 2 things at this luncheon. One is the scientific community is going to be mad at him for making money off of a kit before it was replicated. And I didn't think Lombardi was good enough to make a kit. They sold that kit for a number of years, from 2009 through 2011.
In the end, thousands of kits were sold at a cost of between $300 and $1,000 each. If they sold 1 million kits, they'd stand to make $500 million. Stay with me, I know it's complicated. Who was involved in identifying XMRV in ME/CFS patients? Dr. Judy Mikovits of the WPI, Dr. Bob Silverman of the Cleveland Clinic, who first identified XMRV in prostate cancer patients, was also on the team, along with 40-year veteran Dr. Frank Rossetti from the National Cancer Institute, who discovered the first human retrovirus, HIV/AIDS. XMRV is related to a family of retroviruses called gamma retroviruses. Judy and her lab assistant Max Post were getting similar but not exact sequence matches to Silverman's found gamma retrovirus that was almost identical to VP62. So Silverman asked for 30 samples to be sent to him in Cleveland. But after 2 attempts, he couldn't get a full-length sequence of the virus that Judy and Max identified. That meant that what they sent him simply wasn't XMRV, but something different. So he asked for more samples. But Frank said no, there was too big a chance of contamination. Without Judy's permission or knowledge, Dr. Lombardi, clinical director of VIPDX, cultured the virus along with the patient's samples and sent a third set of 30 samples to Silverman in late March of 2009. This crucial move created the whole house of cards that were destined to come down, because Silverman then emails Mikovits to say he has finally sequenced XMRV in the patient's samples, establishing the discovery of XMRV in ME/CFS patients. 2 years later, in July 2011, Silverman emailed the WPI to notify them that their samples had been contaminated since the beginning with his VP62 plasmid at the Cleveland Clinic.
The only thing that said it was XMRV was some of the samples sent to Dr. Silverman's lab, who vigorously looked only at things that were XMRV. So he came up with XMRV because he never found any viruses but XMRV. We've never had the opportunity to get it sequenced other places. So if there are other sequences closely related to that could be related to the disease is an open question.
We caught Lombardi stealing the reagents for the blood working group in July of 2011. We caught him. We trapped him in the middle of the night. Going somewhere? And I wrote an email the next day and said to Harvey and Annette, I want his key card access removed. I caught him removing federal reagents from this laboratory, preventing us from properly completing the blood working group.
But instead of firing Lombardi, they fired Judy.
The card access was removed from my entire lab personnel within 2 hours of when I've been fired. Everything in that lab, every reagent, every test tube, every pipette, every piece of data, everything was removed from that lab. So what can they do? Oh, repackage the data and sell it back to the government and get the money for my grants. And it's exactly what they did do.
Is there any way possible?
No, because it's all gone. You know it's all in the bottom of Lake Tahoe. They conspired to do the whole thing, and I can pick up piece after piece after piece of evidence.
In other words, as soon as Judy discovered the study was flawed, she told Whittemore to stop selling the test kits, but Harvey refused, warning her to stay out of it. Unknown by Mikovits at the time, Whittemore needed his test kit cash cow to pay off his business partners.
My emails are damning because they answered them. Harvey Whittemore himself, when he was acting as my attorney, told me, Judy, 2010, early 2010, never put anything in an email. Put in the body of an email, put it in an attachment, because that's not legal, that's not evidence in a court of law. From that day on, you know where I put it? The body of an email, and every bit of it. That's why they tried to get my personal email. Not because there was any IP in there, because it knows it corroborates every single thing I said.
Shut out of the Institute, Judy returned home to California. Weeks later, she is suddenly arrested at her front door by Nevada University security guards and local California sheriffs. She is put in prison for apparently stealing her own research data and a laptop with all her emails on it. She is denied the right to a phone call or bail. Unless you have committed a murder, it is extremely unusual to be arrested over a state line.
I discovered a series of unethical, immoral, and possibly illegal acts by the Whittemores and their clinical director Lombardi, and for that, in retaliation, all of this happened to me.
After telling Judy about the contamination, Silverman had contacted Science magazine to notify them that the data on the paper was in question. His figure 1 was no longer valid. Science threatens to retract the whole paper, but Judy says no, some of the other data will stand.
The journal editor said, we'll only do a partial retraction. You make a sound argument that there's still protein data and other data that support that there is an infection in this patient population. So at that time, we were allowed to go back and work on it. But of course, on September 29th, without any kind of warning or reason, I was fired and couldn't go back to the Institute and haven't since.
So Science partially retracts the XMRV discovery paper, removing Silverman's contribution, but leaving Judy's. Finally, a few months later, after she has been jailed and discredited in the media, Science fully retracts the paper. Within days, the second positive paper by Dr. Harvey Alter at the NIH is also fully retracted.
Sure, it doesn't make me look good when I should have known that Lombardi contaminated things. Sure, I was an idiot. I trusted him. Yep, I get it. I thought he was telling me the truth when he said he never did A, B, or C. But he wasn't telling me the truth, and he did A, B, or C. And it hurt the patient population, and for that, I'm deeply sorry. But I didn't, and I was the senior investigator. I was the responsible party. The last name on a paper is responsible for every word in that paper.
So, basically, I think we would have been better off if we had never met Dr. Lombardi.
Because I'm forced to sell that lovely home you just saw. I've lost my entire retirement. I'm blackballed from the very industry that I gave 35 years of my life and have an impeccable career with impeccable integrity. What court in the land where Harvey Whittemore says to Ian Lipkin and Frank Rossetti, we know she doesn't have any money, but if you give us the samples and the money for the Lipkin study, we'll let her go? Really? I'm not given my Fifth Amendment right, my 14th Amendment right, my First Amendment right, or anything else, and yet my freedom and my life in the United States is ransom for the samples in the Lipkin study? Are you kidding me? And they can pull it off. They probably have. You know, are you kidding me? United States.
In order to settle the matter once and for all, the government pays $2.3 million for a renowned virus hunter, Dr. Ian Lipkin, to head up a government-controlled multi-study investigation by everyone involved in the CFS ME research world, including Judy Mikovits, who had been released from prison waiting for her trial when her case was dismissed. Almost a year later, the Lipkin study was completed.
We were on a very confidential conference call. Around the world, you had to sign in, you had to voice in, you couldn't pick up that phone except your own phone and not have anybody else in the room. It was very interesting because it had the head of the NIH, NCI, NIAID, and they were all on the call. As we listened, it was government controlled because it was the Lipkin study was government funded, millions of dollars, and you know, you could have blown me over with a feather when I heard the results because it was blinded and we didn't know.
A double-blind trial means both the tester and the subject don't know the results until calculated, and in this case, the calculation was government controlled at the highest level.
The results of the genetic tests, which were chiefly PCR, and people used whatever methods they wanted to use, found no evidence of XMRV or related viruses in either the subjects with chronic fatigue syndrome, myalgic encephalomyelitis, or the controls.
I had great confidence we were going to find evidence of those strains of virus in the Lipkin study, in the well-controlled, well-powered study. And of course, when we only came up with 3% in patients and 3% in controls, you know, I was as surprised as anybody.
I thought we had something that, if it didn't cause a disease, was a human pathogen worth looking at.
I do think it is interesting to note that XMRV Silverman was accepted for many years as a virus in prostate cancer, but when associated with ME/CFS, the government spent millions investigating it. Virus hunters have been following this for decades, and many viruses have been associated with it along the way. Many are present in ME/CFS patients, but none has been found to cause the illness. The poliovirus was the first culprit, but was soon discounted. However, there is a post-polio syndrome that occurs in polio sufferers decades after first infection. Out of the blue, post-polio syndrome is set off by the same triggers as ME/CFS: a flu, a trauma, exhaustion. There is no sign of a virus, and the symptoms are remarkably similar to ME/CFS. The difference is post-polio patients are given respect, and ME/CFS patients are treated like liars because science doesn't have an answer.
After the wonderful work on acute diseases that we've cured, whether it's polio or measles or anything, the acute diseases are easy to figure out but it's the chronic diseases, whether it's cancer, diabetes, chronic fatigue syndrome, they're multifactorial, so they're difficult to really get a handle on. And I think there's a whole lot of neurological diseases, whether it's autism or Alzheimer's or CFS, ME, that we don't understand. And I thought it was a fascinating thing to study. And I think likely, though it may not be the only cause, there's probably infectious agents involved in it.
Despite the fact that it was not replicated, has nonetheless raised the level of awareness of chronic fatigue syndrome and myalgic encephalitis more generally. And that's actually a good thing. That's the way science should work. And we now need to do more research.
Then in April 2013, for the first time in its history, the Food and Drug Administration held a symposium on the disease. This was the time to find out if any progress had been made since the announcement of the retrovirus.
Our goal is to move forward, talking about chronic fatigue syndrome, or CFS, a serious, complex, and we all know severely debilitating disease of, for the most part, unknown etiology. Ultimately, getting to the bottom of this and understanding what that common root is so that we can actually cure it.
These meetings are primarily for patients. We want others to listen. It's an opportunity for patients to talk and, frankly, for everybody else to listen.
My name is Dr. John Kaiser, and I practice medicine in the San Francisco Bay Area. In 1987, after many stressful years of working as a solo doc in a busy emergency room, I developed ME/CFS. I had severe fatigue, recurrent sore throats, chronic pain, and unrefreshing sleep. If I exercised just a modest amount, I would experience a devastating crash with an exacerbation of all my symptoms. I remember lying down on the couch frequently between patients. I'm here to speak for the thousands of people with CFS who are able to work, but struggle to make it through each day and each week.
My former life as a veteran was as a military linguist. I translated Arabic on the fly. I would typically listen to multiple conversations at once, at least one in each ear of my headphones. I now have trouble translating the same language for more than probably 2 or at most 4 hours.
23 years ago, I came down with myalgic encephalomyelitis. I'm a lawyer, used to reading, analyzing, writing, and talking to judges and clients. Within days of getting sick, I could not read a memo I had written myself. It literally looked like hieroglyphics on the page. The impact of this illness on my life has been significant. I've had to give up my law career. I can't work. Due to my light and sound sensitivity and my activity limitations, I've moved to a quieter neighborhood and adjusted to a life spent mainly housebound and lying on a couch or bed.
We have a severe condition that causes huge impacts in our lives. And we have a very legitimate fear of what happens when we overexert ourselves.
It's almost like your nervous system at any given point just completely runs out of energy and you just fall off a cliff.
There is no warning. There's nothing I have done. There's nothing I can attribute it to.
I'd been in the hospital thousands of times, and I got out the elevator and couldn't remember where to go.
Something that you can normally undertake suddenly produces a collapse.
It's the unpredictability of this that's really, really quite difficult to live with.
There is probably a single underlying thing that is happening to all of us patients that we have not yet identified.
While patients wait for science to catch up with their condition, they are left with attempts to alleviate symptoms.
Treatments have included everything from antibiotics, azithromycin, doxycycline, antivirals, Valtrex, famciclovir, to supplements, B12 injections, and others, graded exercise therapy, CBT, and pacing. I'm currently on famciclovir, 500 milligrams, and low doses of Savella, 25 milligrams, and amitriptyline, 10 milligrams.
Famvir, Valtrex, Valcyte, antibiotics such as Zithromax, Levaquin, Ceftin, amoxicillin. I was put on Prozac, Pamelor, Deseril, several other antidepressives, Lyrica, Cymbalta, Flexeril.
Oxycodone and Percocet, and she had to take a lot of Advil, and she wound up with esophageal ulcers after a few years of that, and now she would have to, she needs to go into a rehab or something to get off these medications.
I was a 44-year-old tenured professor of history at Villanova when I suffered a blackout in my office in October 24th, 1994. From that point on, I was very sick. I suffered from blackouts, absent seizures, ataxia, expressive dysphagia, disorientation, short-term memory loss, dyslexia, tinnitus, sensitivity to light and sound, massive confusion. My world grew smaller and smaller. I couldn't drive a car. By the summer of 1996, I was falling every time I tried to walk, so we had to get a wheelchair. In 1997, we added a riser to the toilet and a shower chair. Finally, in the fall of 1998, I was confined to bed, able only to make it to the bathroom and back by holding onto furniture and walls. By the end of 1998, I couldn't even brush my own teeth. I began Ampligen on February 4th, 1999. In 2 months, I could walk without a cane. In 5 months, I could drive again. The most remarkable moment was when I realized that for the first time in 4.5 years, I did not feel sick. I continued to improve on Ampligen, and after 20 months, I thought I'd been cured. But 1 year later, so I stopped treatment because it's expensive. 1 year later, I had a blackout, and HHV6A was back. It took 7 months to get back on Ampligen in Philadelphia. I remained on Ampligen for over 5 years before I lost it again. At that point, I was doing so well, I could go hiking for a half hour with my brother.
Ampligen is an antiretroviral drug that the FDA has been unable to approve for 30 years.
The first time I tried to blow out a candle after I started Ampligen, the wax went all over the table.
This would not have been possible without Ampligen. I am so much more functional because of the drug. It's like I'm an entirely new person.
Before Ampligen, I was literally bedbound. When people talk about being bedbound, I mean, we're like bricks. We can't be moved. To get me up and allow me to think clearly, allow me to function, allow me to make my own meals, allow me to go outside with my boys is a miracle drug.
The problem with Ampligen is that it doesn't work for everyone, but it does immensely improve the lives of some patients. So what is in the way of its approval?
I support the development and the approval of Ampligen. It's just a start. There are very few treatments that are consistently helpful in a significant number of patients, and I think Ampligen is.
The government must actually put adequate funds in for research. There are a lot of researchers out here who have got wonderful projects but are not funded. I think Ampligen is one of these fundable projects because we need, as one of the people on the panel said, we need more data. well, if we need more data, we should actually be funding the project to actually try and get more data so that we can actually prove or disprove this particular product.
Take the ones who respond and the ones who don't respond and use all these marvelous profiling technologies to see what the difference is all the way down to the individual genes. And then you could say, okay, good, now we've got an idea of what the common pathways are.
Perhaps if the FDA were to approve an antiretroviral drug for this disease, it would blow the psychological argument out of the water. And that will be problematic to current government policy and the policies of insurance companies deciding disability. After all, with a psychological diagnosis, only 1 in 5 applications for disability payments in the US are accepted, much cheaper than paying 5 out of 5 for a physical illness. And so for 30 years, a drug that is effective for some is stuck in the development stage at unaffordable cost.
The physicians who reviewed it and the other scientists who reviewed it were excited about the possibility of what they might find. And we just didn't see that in the data that they provided to us to collect it.
Judy Mikovits said after her release, one of the things that was so wrong about what happened is that they threw out all of my research. They destroyed it all. And this is the saddest part. We came up with a study that showed who would do well on Ampligen. 30% of the people with ME/CFS had antibodies to spleen focus-forming virus, and these were the patients who responded to Ampligen. If I hadn't been so thoroughly discredited and my research destroyed, Ampligen could have been approved.
I'm 54. I've been doing this since I was 24. I do not want to be sitting up here saying the same thing when I'm 64.
We need more research, more money to look at the underlying causes of this illness. Until we find that, people are going to be taking drugs, having side effects from the drugs, watching the drugs' effects dissipate over time because we are not treating the disease.
Our division has its doors wide open for applications for chronic fatigue syndrome. That should send a very strong message out there to pharma that, hey, this may be a financial opportunity here. And that's money makes the world go around. That's how it works.
For decades, there has been a shadow on the field that appears to have been placing the disease, classifying the disease as a psychological or psychiatric disorder for various reasons. And the people who honestly believe that have had some reasons to do so. However, ME or CFS is absolutely a real disease, real illness that has an organic basis.
Do you think that XMRV was a turning point in some ways?
Oh, definitely. I believe the illness went from an illness of that people thought might not be real to a mysterious, unexplained, debilitating illness that we couldn't explain. That's very, very different.
So I think that we possibly are within a couple of years, hopefully less than that, to find the equivalent to that microscope to be able to see what really is abnormal in the CFS ME patients that will allow us to say, wow, that was there all along in front of our faces, but we didn't have the right technology to do so.
With Judy's actually worldwide press has been positive because now actually people are more tuned to actually reading about this disease, whereas previously they said, oh yes, it's that yuppie flu. It's that disease that people think that they're sick.
What helps foster research? It's usually when you have something that's got good boundaries around it. For many years, I think multiple sclerosis was the same way, but because of the variability of the patients, their conditions, the waxing and waning of symptoms, but as soon as someone started to find common underlying pathology, that just stimulated research and a focused attempt to address it.
Indications that patients have articulated in the past 2 days that I was not completely aware of, and I will admit readily in the public forum my ignorance of what you go through And I appreciate your honesty in sharing that with me. Thank you.
For some, though, time is running out. A study conducted in the US established the leading causes of death in CFS patients. 20% from suicide, 20% from heart failure, 20% from cancer.
It is very distressing to be told on a fairly regular basis that someone has committed suicide with this illness. And although a fair number of these people who do commit suicide are quite severely affected, not only the severely affected people who do, it's people who have really what are a multitude of problems associated with this illness. They can't get their benefits, their family don't understand them, their doctor is no use, they've run into financial problems, they have problems with things like pain, which doesn't seem to be controlled by the medical profession. So it's a combination of things where they don't want to go on with this illness, and no one is coming up with a solution to it, no one is coming up with a treatment for it, and they don't want to go on. It's not the fact that they're depressed. In fact, my experience, many of these people who commit suicide are not actually clinically depressed. It is just the culmination of so many frustrations with so many different aspects of the illness that they take their own life.
Yeah, at one point things got really, really too much to bear. And I took an overdose because I felt like such a failure, because I couldn't work. And I had no money coming in, and before, working and money had always it been my life, or working had been my life, and I'd always, you know, been able to go out and buy nice clothes, get my hair done, get my nails done. I was able to buy my niece things. I was able to buy my sister presents, or my mum, and to have all that snatched away from you and no one be able to give you an answer as to why you feel so dreadful. I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't want to go on. I had got to the point I'd spent quite a few weeks. It was after the last time I tried to work, and I had to give it up after, I think I lasted about a month. And I was getting up and I was going to work and I was coming home and I had to get straight into bed, and this went on, and I thought, oh, you know, I can't keep doing this, and I was no good at work. You know, I couldn't find the words down the phone. Couldn't write properly. My brain had just gone, and I had to give it up, even though I kept trying for about a month. And after that, I was in so much pain because I had forced myself to go out to work, and I then just got to the stage where I thought, I can't see any light at the end of the tunnel, and I was so much pain. I had phoned up the doctors in the night and asked for painkillers because of the pain in my legs, and they weren't supportive at all. And I just, you know, remember lying there and thinking, you know, I can't go on like this, not working, being in pain, getting no support from doctors. I couldn't see a way out. And it's something that I deeply regret now, because what did happen is from the overdose, that I came out of the hospital grateful for the life, however limited that may be. Even if I don't have a job, even if I don't have money, I have still got the love of my family and close friends, and I shouldn't have forgotten that. But sometimes I think you can get so low with pain and exhaustion and ignorance and misunderstanding that it doesn't surprise me that people do succeed in taking their own lives, and they've got ME.
So much misunderstanding, so much pain, and the stigma still remains. Sophia suffered from severe ME for at least 6 years. As we have stated before, Since 1969, the World Health Organization has categorized ME as a physical neurological disease. Doctors and a psychiatrist threatened Sophia with sectioning in a mental hospital if she refused to go into an ME clinic offering the government's present and popular treatment plans. They carried out their threat in July 2003.
You're sectioning me under the Mental Health Act. If I knew that the only other option was to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act, then I would have gone to the ME clinic. My solicitor, when I spoke to her, I said that I was offered a place in the ME clinic. I turned it down. It wasn't. I explained to you, doctor, that it was because I asked them also about the treatment. I didn't feel that what they were offering me was going to help so much, also because of the journey. I said to her, I didn't want to go to the ME clinic, and these are the reasons why. And I said to her, but gosh, if they're going to say I'm mentally ill because I won't go to the ME clinic, then, I'll go. The conditions that I'm going to be kept in mental hospital are going to make the ME symptoms so severe, so severe. I'm just asking again, I've got ME, I'm not mentally ill. I've got ME, I have all the symptoms of ME. My ME is nothing to do with the relationship with my mum. I have a very healthy relationship with my mum.
Sophia was removed from her home against her wishes and institutionalized that day. The effects on Sophia's health were devastating. She died on the 25th of November 2005. She was only 32 years old. Do no harm. The Hippocratic Oath is an oath historically taken by physicians. I will prescribe regimens for the good of my patients according to my ability and judgment, and never do harm to anyone. Despite the reality of the World Health Organization definition of ME/CFS, it would seem the UK government makes it up as they go along to serve policy, not fact. To seek some answers, we visited Dr. Sarah Myhill in Wales to see what had happened to her and her practice since the GMC hearing in 2010.
The fundamental problem is modern medicine does not ask the question why. Doctors are satisfied with symptom suppressing with drugs. So if you have a headache, it's diagnosed as paracetamol deficiency and you get given paracetamol. If you have arthritis, you get given pain-killing drugs. The awful thing about those things is they actually accelerate the underlying process so people get worse quicker. But because they're not asking the question why, they have no hope of curing people with chronic fatigue syndromes. I mean, I have been conventionally trained and worked in general practice for 30 years, and this is what I do. And I can't believe that other doctors haven't followed the same evolution. But to ask them to treat chronic fatigue syndrome in the way that I am means asking them to rethink the whole way they think about medicine. And they are stuck in a system which is driven by the drug companies. The guidelines are laid down, and doctors who don't follow those paths suffer sanctions. As you know, I've been sanctioned by the General Medical Council, not because any patients complained, not because I've made anybody ill, but simply because my ideas and views don't square with establishment thinking. Morning, Rosie.
Good morning.
For over 30 years, Sarah Myhill has been successfully helping thousands of patients improve their day-to-day lives.
I can't think that I've had a patient that hasn't improved for putting in place, these very basic, simple things to improve their energy and allow them to feel better. And everybody needs a horizon, everybody needs a plan that they can work towards and keep going. Not many people recover if they continue to eat a Western diet, which is high in sugar, refined carbohydrate and grains. The evolutionary correct diet is the Stone Age diet, and that is nearly always the starting point for nearly everybody. If we're not making progress at that point, then we start to do more specialist investigations. And those that I would use very regularly, mitochondrial function tests, which tell us how well the mitochondria work. Without mitochondria, nothing can live. They are the energy generators. So if you think of the body as a car, For your car to work, you have to have the right fuel in the tank, which is your diet and the gut function. You have to have the engine working, and the engines are our mitochondria. And mitochondria take fuel from the bloodstream and they burn it in the presence of oxygen in order to produce energy, which is ATP. And with a molecule of ATP, you can do any job. You can make the car go forward, you can toot the horn, you can switch the lights on. And then to control the engine, we need an accelerator pedal, and that's the thyroid gland. And then the gearbox of the car is the adrenal gland. And the adrenal gland allows us to gear up in response to stress. So normally we're just idling along in first or second gear, but if a physical stress comes, or a mental stress, or an emotional stress, we can move up into fourth gear and into overdrive if necessary. A problem in any one of those departments and your car will go slow. Energy delivery will be slow. And clinically, we see chronic fatigue syndrome. Whether the mitochondria are going slow because they're deficient in something, they don't have the raw materials to do the job, or because they're blocked by something, and of course, I've seen hundreds of farmers with sheep dip flu, and guess what? Their mitochondria are blocked by organophosphates. The Gulf War veterans, the same, their mitochondria are blocked by organophosphates because they were so exposed. I see farming with 9/11 syndrome whose mitochondria are blocked by organochlorines because that's what happens when you burn plastics, you produce nasty toxic chemicals. A virus will kick a hole in the energy bucket. You can still treat those patients by improving energy delivery systems with the mitochondrial approach, the dietary approach, the gut function approach, the thyroid, the adrenal stuff, and so on. And it may well be that if you can improve energy delivery sufficiently, you will then give the immune system the energy to kick the virus out on its own. I don't know. It's a reasonable hypothesis. But the fact of the matter is patients do respond very well to this basic workup. It's not an easy path to walk, but it's the logical way to go, and it's the only way I know to help people. It's quite wrong that I and like-minded doctors should be treated as heretics, but that's what it amounts to in the eyes of the establishment. I just have to be grateful I didn't live 400 years ago, because I'd have been burnt at the stake.
What do we now know about this devastating illness that is destroying lives, careers, relationships, and any hope for a normal life in sufferers, doctors, and scientists alike? Regardless of age, gender, social standing, anyone at any time can fall ill with ME/CFS in any part of the world, and no one is being cured. For the majority of cases, whether triggered by a virus or environmental factors such as chemicals or pesticides, there are still no answers, leaving a sea of sufferers and the world population at risk. There will be dire consequences if nothing is done.
They really need to re-examine the history. They need to take a look at what they've done, the consequences of their inaction, how many lives have been destroyed. They need to take responsibility and get the research back on track. They need to completely go through the CDC, find out what went wrong, how such a thing could happen, and make sure that this never, never happens again.